Hey guys, I'm Ash and welcome to our bonus module of the Solo Travel Bootcamp. So today I'm going to be giving you some pointers and tips in terms of how to start organising your trip, particularly if it is your first solo trip overseas. Before I get into some of the key steps to consider when planning your first solo trip overseas, I just wanted to highlight to you guys that realistically, organising a trip overseas by yourself does take time. Depending on how long you're traveling for, it can be tedious, it can be an emotional roller coaster, it can be frustrating, it can be all of the above and exciting, of course. But the main thing to remember is that your trip's never going to organize itself. It does take determined action to actually work your way through the steps and get yourselves ready to when you can then finally take that leap to then go overseas and travel solo. So, you can watch hundreds of resources, you can check out articles, you can check out videos, but realistically, until you actually make that step to start taking action, it's not until then that you'll actually start feeling fully realizing that this is real and that you are actually organizing your trip. And once that date comes, you're going to be overseas and in a whole new world. So very exciting, but yes, I will help to run you through some of the key steps to consider, because I know when I was organizing my first year trip overseas, it was overwhelming how much you actually have to organize and how much admin is actually involved to make sure that your trip runs seamlessly. So the first things I wanted to talk about, which I'm sure you guys are probably already you might have already considered, given that you're now at that point of organizing your trip. But number one is, where do you want to go? Have you thought this out? Have you checked out, the Smart Traveller government advice in terms of what locations are safe for solo travelers and where you might want to avoid? But yeah, the first thing obviously is choosing your destination. And this is probably the most exciting part in my eyes, because I just have so many places on my bucket list. It never ends. Honestly, guys, I think the more that you travel, the bigger your list becomes. So yes, that's the pretty exciting part. So if you've already done that, then you can move on to step 2, which is creating your travel budget and your pre-travel plan. So the great thing about Australia is, for a lot of us, traveling across to Asia or some of these other places that do have a cheaper cost of living, it is great because you can actually, your money goes a lot further. However, places like Europe, America, a lot of different places in the world, realistically, they can be quite expensive. So at the same time, where there's some destinations where it's a breeze and, we feel like, we can afford a lot for our money, you do have to really consider where you're going and whether that's going to have an impact on how much you can afford during your trip as well. The next step is to book your main flights. So, obviously, flights can be really expensive. So even if you don't book them as step number 3, but at least you're keeping your eye on the price of the flights that you're looking at, sort of track the trends, keep a Google alert on to let you know when the prices dip. It's always great to start looking at the flights and how much you can likely expect to be out of pocket before you get really close to your trip. Another thing too is your big expenses, like if you want to do group tours or there's certain activities that you're wanting to tick off your bucket list, definitely keep these in mind early, because it will impact how much you want to save and how much you want to, use of your budget to put towards these kind of activities. So the next thing to consider as well is accommodation. So this is something which I sometimes, depending on where you're going and whether you're going during peak season or if you're going off peak, you always want to consider getting getting dibs on the best accommodation, particularly the cheap stuff. So sometimes I find particularly hostels that, are really great quality, great value for money. They're not just necessarily just a party hostel, but have, amazing location, amazing facilities. They're often the ones that go first. And sometimes, even if you've got months before your trip, it's always best to sort of maybe, particularly with platforms like booking.com or Hostel World or Hostel Bookers, you can actually book accommodation without having to pay a deposit or without having to pay the full amount. So it can be a really great idea just to get in early, get the accommodation that you want for your trip. And then if you need to cancel, you can always do so, usually for free, before a certain time before your trip. So Yeah, so I always suggest, do your research early, get really clear on what you want in terms of accommodation and where you want to stay. And yeah, just do your best to lock that in as early as you can. Or if you want to be more spontaneous and kind of book as you go, you can do that as well. It just depends where you're going again, but also as well how long you're planning to travel for. Another area that is a really important step when planning your first solo trip is to consider whether there's any travel vaccinations or visas that you need. The reason that you want to consider this quite early in the journey is because it can actually take some time sometimes for these to process. Particularly when I was going to Africa and the Middle East, there were some visas that I needed to have before I was traveling. And there are some that require you to actually send off your passport to a consulate within Australia or wherever it is you are in the world. And because they have your passport, you obviously want to make sure that you've left enough time to get your passport back before you're traveling. So definitely consider this early. But again, there is also a sweet spot because you don't want the visa to expire before you get there either. So it's something where you want to make sure that you do your research. And again, I cover this in a lot more detail in the article below, but I highlight some really important things to consider about visas, as well as some great websites that you can refer to work out what you need and also, how long they typically take to get and last for as well. The same thing with vaccinations. There are some vaccinations where you actually need to do I think there was one I can't remember if it was tetanus or if it was something else, but you actually had to have 3 injections over a certain period of time. So the last thing you want is to be ready to go for your trip and realize you need a vaccination, but you actually can't get the full dose before you go. So just make sure to check out the vaccinations. Again, in the article below, I provide a bit more detail in, resources you can check out, as well as some of the more common vaccinations for travelers when traveling overseas. I think some of the ones that I had included, yellow fever, tetanus, hepatitis. What else did I have? I had tablets of malaria or anti-malaria, whatever they call it. But yeah, you can end up having quite a few that you need to get. So you just want to make sure that you do get the right ones that you need before you go. Especially for me with traveling to Africa, it's actually a requirement to have yellow fever in order to actually enter the country. So you definitely don't want to get stuck with that issue and have to return home because you don't have a bloody vaccination. So something else so next up, another thing you want to consider is your travel gear and accessories. Now, this is something which I wouldn't say is do it all in one hit and tick it off the list. Travel gear is something that I think is actually best to span out over a longer period of time. The reason being, it can actually cost you a bit of money to get all the travel gear you need. So it can be a little bit less overwhelming to actually just treat it in bite-sized chunks as opposed to just going out and spending $1,000 on travel gear. And also as well, you want to make sure that you're doing your research as well, and that you actually take the time to look into what travel gear is best for your type of travel and also for your budget too. So you can actually check out on our website, we actually have a section on travel gear, and I run you through a lot of really great tips in terms of things to look for when buying certain travel gear, as well as ways that you can save money too. I'm one of those people, I'm not going to tell you to buy something if I don't see the value in it, or if I haven't really used it myself for any of my travel experiences. So you can definitely trust what I recommend. I'm not just going to sell you things because I earn a commission on them. I really do thoroughly do hours of research looking into what the best options are and what you can get to make sure that you're getting the best value for your money. Another area which is kind of dry and it's boring as hell, and yes, you do usually have to read the terms and conditions, is travel insurance. So travel insurance is something that I know some people tend to skip, and I have done that myself as well. But guys, although yes, you might be saving yourself, a few $100 or whatever it's going to be by not getting travel insurance, my God, if something happens to you overseas, the cost associated with that, whether it be hospitalization, whether it be theft, whether it be your gear getting stuck on the plane and you're not having any access to your stuff for a few days. Some of this stuff could really make or break your trip. And I do believe it is important to have cover, especially given, even if you do have to pay a few hundred or more for your travel insurance, at least you know that you are protected if something happens to you. Something to look out for in travel insurance, though, is that there are some providers that have better cover than others, especially if you're an adrenaline or adventure junkie like me. There tends to be a lot of activities that aren't actually covered by certain travel insurance providers. So really do make sure that you check their conditions, especially things like driving vehicles, scuba diving, mountain hiking, kayaking, whitewater rafting. There's a lot of different sort of more adventurous sports that, because of the perceived risk of them, a lot of travel insurance companies will include, what's the word, like clauses or disclaimers. Yeah, it's talking about that they will only cover those experiences if certain conditions are met. So just be mindful of that when you're looking at travel insurance. I've also written an article on travel insurance where I again break down some really great travel insurance providers in Australia, and also some great ways in which you can actually compare different insurances to save you time, but also to save you money as well. Make sure you're getting the best deal that you can. Another area to consider when planning your trip is whether you need an international credit card or direct debit money card. It is something where if you're traveling to a foreign country, sometimes by using your local bank card can actually rack you up a ton of bank fees, currency conversion fees. Absolute pain in the ass, guys. Massive pain in the ass, and can really kill, add a lot of, take a lot of money from your budget if you don't account for it. Another step to consider when planning your first solo trip overseas is also your mental health, guys. I know it sounds kind of like, that's not a step, but really it is. And it's something that I really think is important to think about before you actually go traveling, in terms of, do you have any specific needs? What are some strategies you can look into that if you are having a low period when you're traveling, are there people you can reach out to? Can you pack something like a DVD of movies or your favorite music on Spotify? Just make sure that you're equipped so that if you are overseas and you're having a low moment, whether it be depression or if you're stressed, and you've got a lot of anxiety about something, it could even be the fear of meeting new people, just equip yourself and make sure that, you do pack things with you that are going to help you through those days. Some other things to consider while you're planning your trip is what sort of solo travel apps can help you throughout your trip, because obviously it's great to be able to download those apps and set them up, get them ready to go before you actually take that flight to go to your destination. So it could be apps like, wireless maps. There's one that I love called maps.me. And that's a really great resource which allows you to download maps in a foreign country. And then when you're out on the streets, you don't need data to actually access the maps and work out where you are. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that Google Maps typically, or Google or Apple Maps, they usually use your data or some form of internet source to operate. So you can get easily stuck when you're overseas realizing, oh shit, I don't have Wi-Fi, I don't have internet, shit, my maps isn't working, where the heck am I? So we don't want that. You can download that app. You can also download apps like toilet apps, help me find the nearest toilet, budgeting apps, currency exchange apps, which can be currency converters, which can make things a lot easier for you when you're in those foreign countries. But yeah, there's lots of amazing apps out there, guys. So I also have written another article on this that you can check out, but it's a really great idea to actually download these before you go. Use your home data or your Wi-Fi or whatever, so then once you're overseas, you don't have to worry about it. There are also things to consider like Wi-Fi. So what do you want to do with your phone? Are you planning to get a SIM card when overseas? Are you planning to just use Wi-Fi at the relevant designated places as you go? Or, do you need to have a VPN source for your laptop? There's lots of different things to consider as well when it comes to Wi-Fi and how to find it when traveling. And also in terms of the security of the Wi-Fi you're using. So when I was traveling, some of the most common Wi-Fi resources I would use was my accommodation. But also as well, if I was out on the town, you can also use places like, your Starbucks, your McDonald's, which tend to have Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi available. But you also want to be really careful because you don't want to just plug into any Wi-Fi source that you find, because you never quite know if it's fully secure. You don't want someone just getting all your phone data or your laptop. You want to be really careful. But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to scare you or anything. It's more so just thinking about it before you go so that you have a solid plan in place in terms of what you plan to do. Another one is sickness. And my God, this can totally ruin your trip. I will never, ever forget the worst sickness experience I had when traveling. I was traveling from Tanzania in Africa to the Seychelles. And I remember my hostel baked me a breakfast in the morning, which was lovely, but they obviously cooked it really early in the morning, AKA, I don't know, midnight to 4 a.m. or something. My flight was around 6 or 7 a.m. So what I hadn't considered was that it was humid, it was hot. They'd cooked me eggs. And by the time I picked those eggs up and was eating them, they obviously were rot, they were off, or something wasn't wrong. It had salmonella, something was going on a bit funky there. Anyway, I have never been so sick on a flight. I think I was on a 4 to 6 hour flight, I think. And it was both ways, guys. I was vomiting, I was running to the toilet. Thank God I had empty sins next to me so I could actually lie down and just try and rock back and forth. But the most horrible feeling of people in their seats just watching you going up and down the aisle, running back and forth because you have to shit your pants. So yeah, it's really important to consider these things. And that's why I say, even with water and salads being washed in the local water, things like that, just don't take it for granted, because getting sick on your trip sucks. And it doesn't even have to be your diarrheas or, your gastro kind of bugs. It can even just be getting a cold or a flu. So when you're traveling in planes a lot of sickness does just circulate around and around. It's very easy to catch things when you're traveling. So again, it's just about having a plan in terms of, what sort of things are you going to pack to actually, take when you're sick, or to help you get through those days, whether it be a full-fledged first aid kit, or whether it just is, have some aspirin, some Panadol, Imodium, Hydrolyte, things like that can really save the day when you get sick with some of those kind of things. This is why it's also important to keep really good hygiene. So, I always carried around with myself, and now with COVID having happened, most of us are a lot better with it. But, carrying some of those little sanitizer bottles around with you, that can really save your life as well. In some countries where the toilet sanitary system isn't great, or if you just happen to walk into a super funky public toilet or hostel, at least you've got that there with you to use in your handbag or something like that. So you can just make sure that you're actually clean. It's a much nicer feeling than when you have to walk away and then eat food and you feel disgusting. So there are a couple of tips, or key steps you want to think about and plan for when you're actually planning your overarching trip overseas. But again, as I mentioned, I'll talk through these in a lot more detail in the article below. So ensure to check that out. Make sure you check out our article on some of the most important steps to consider when planning your trips. You'll also find there's some other articles that link off that you can check out and read more about. So whether it comes to travel gear, safety, organising accommodation, sickness, how to deal with some of your mental health and feeling lonely when you're traveling, I have written a lot of amazing resources. They're all there for you guys to access. So definitely make use of them. But other than that, congratulations, guys. That is the end of the course. I hope that you've got a lot of value from some of the modules that we've covered to date. You can always follow us on Instagram or on YouTube. Adventure Travel Pro is our account name. So yeah, check us out, follow us. You can also message me directly through Instagram and I can answer your questions there as well. So yeah, it's just a really nice place to develop a community and to kind of keep in touch with some of the resources we're posting that could add a lot of value to you as you're organizing your trip. So that's it, guys. I so look forward to helping you with your trip, and I wish you all the best and safe travels ahead. All right, see you guys.